After the divorce, the woman ended up in a miserable shack instead of the solid home where she had pampered and cherished her husband for 15 years. And he, deciding to start a new life, simply threw her out. But the traitor underestimated the stupid housewife. Estrella? What can she possibly do? No one would want her except me. To say that it hurt the young woman to hear such words from her beloved husband is to say nothing at all. Come on, she's a decent woman, his friends tried to object. Rodrigo, you don't even know how lucky you are. Look at mine, for example, always off at her mother's. And if she's not off at her mother's, then the mother-in-law is at our place. And I wish she were off somewhere. I wish she'd disappear altogether, she's completely useless. And all the mother-in-law does is nag me. I don't make enough money, I drink too much, the kids are dumb. And apparently all of that is my fault, not because Paula does nothing but sit on her phone, swinging her leg instead of raising the kids. My mother-in-law lives 1,500 kilometers away, another friend chimed in, but I've got a different kind of headache. For some reason, my woman decided that fading youth can be replaced with money. So if I don't cough up cash for all these potions for her wrinkled face, she just doesn't put out. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The group burst into laughter and expressed hope that their buddy would find a way to handle that issue. She practically times me with a stopwatch to see when I get home from work, another friend shouted. So I can only dream about that, and even then only silently. Sometimes I feel like she can read my thoughts. For a moment, silence fell over the table. Apparently, each man was calculating how possible that really was, and worrying whether his own woman had such a device. Nah, it's all nonsense, came Rodrigo's voice again, Estrella's husband. A woman should know her place, and that's the end of it. My woman understands perfectly well that I blessed her by marrying her. So she should just sit quietly like a mouse under a broom and not draw attention to herself. In our world, what is a woman without a man? What could they even do if we didn't earn money and bring it to them? The conversation moved on to loftier topics, like how to dodge taxes and other things businessmen find pleasant, while Estrella was barely holding back tears that were threatening to roll down her cheeks. 16 years ago, when young Estrella had first met Rodrigo, he had seemed like a magical prince out of a fairy tale. Her family wasn't well off, quite the opposite. They were closer to church mouse poor. So when Rodrigo started taking his new acquaintance out to cafes, even restaurants, showering her with gifts and flowers, Estrella couldn't resist his charm. Rodrigo was 12 years older than her, but that didn't seem like a reason to be embarrassed or not to fall in love. You're very mature for your age. It's a pleasure to talk to you, he'd say, and the girl was thrilled to be appreciated so highly. I've never met anyone like you before. It seemed Rodrigo had had many flings before her, and Estrella didn't hide that it hurt to think he might one day grow bored of her and leave. That's why she constantly worked on herself, as the glossy magazines advised. Rodrigo, who watched this from the sidelines, seemed amused by how seriously Estrella took their relationship. Before Estrella, Rodrigo had already been married twice, but she didn't know that at the time. So when he proposed on her 18th birthday, it came as a wonderful surprise. For a moment, Estrella couldn't even breathe. Then she squealed with joy and threw her arms around Rodrigo, now her fiancé and future husband. The wedding was cheerful, though only one guest came from the bride's side, her friend Carmen, whom she had studied with at trade school. Estrella's mother, who had raised 2 daughters alone, had already passed away by then. Her older sister had long since built her own life and moved to another city with her boyfriend, leaving Estrella completely alone. Do I even need to say how timely Rodrigo's proposal to tie their fates together was? You're lucky, Estrella. You'll be safe behind your rich husband like behind a stone wall, Carmen said sincerely, without a trace of envy. Carmen had been born with one leg slightly shorter than the other, so she walked with a noticeable limp. Because of this, she had never hoped to build a family or have a happy marriage, and she truly rejoiced for Estrella. The most important thing is that Rodrigo is a good person, the bride said. The fact that he has money is just a nice bonus. Though it seemed Rodrigo had money, it wasn't exactly intended for her as far as Estrella's honor was concerned. From the very first days of living together, Rodrigo made it clear to his young wife that he would control the finances. He would give her strictly fixed amounts for household expenses in their spacious 3-room apartment. If she needed more, she'd have to earn it. But even that came with plenty of conditions. Since Estrella had trained as a hairdresser, she hoped to find a job at a good salon. Maybe, with Rodrigo's help, she could even buy her own equipment and rent a chair at a popular place. What kind of nonsense is that? Rodrigo sharply rejected his young wife's plans. Don't you understand how ashamed I'd be if any of our mutual acquaintances saw you standing by a hairdressing chair? What's shameful about me wanting to earn my own money cutting and coloring hair? Estrella asked, taken aback. She couldn't understand why her husband spoke about it as if it were something akin to prostitution. Because there's the service industry, and then there's servants. And then there are people who use services, Rodrigo explained vaguely. From that, Estrella could draw only one conclusion: Rodrigo saw himself as part of high society and was literally embarrassed that his wife might have to work. Then how am I supposed to earn money for myself? She asked in surprise. I don't want to be a freeloader. Then don't be one, Rodrigo replied in the same tone. Find yourself a job with some status and go work there. Easier said than done. With only a vocational school diploma, Estrella had little chance of finding a position that her husband would consider worthy. Rodrigo himself couldn't even define what a worthy job would look like. Just find something that won't make me embarrassed to say where my wife works, he'd say. And once again, Estrella could only shrug. Eventually, after a few months of fruitless searching, the young woman had no choice but to stay home, and judging by Rodrigo's reaction, that was exactly what he had wanted. Her husband earned a living through some kind of business. Naturally, no one gave Estrella the details. She wasn't stupid and suspected things might not be entirely legal, but she didn't dare ask Rodrigo about it. She only hoped there was nothing criminal going on in her husband's dealings. And so the young family settled into life, slowly and cautiously. Despite Rodrigo never giving her large amounts of money, Estrella felt genuinely happy and breathed freely for the first time. Growing up with her mother and older sister, there had never even been talk of going on vacation anywhere farther than the local river beyond the village, or buying a new outfit. True, as time went on, Rodrigo increasingly began to accompany such spontaneous purchases with an unpleasant, slimy phrase. Let's try to improve what nature forgot to finish. But Estrella chalked it up to his bad character. And really, it wasn't her place to argue. At least she was fed and provided for. Even when her husband went away on business for several days, or disappeared for a whole week, Estrella still considered herself lucky. The only thing that truly gnawed at her was the absence of children. At first, she didn't pay it much mind and just lived her life, probably until around age 25. But then even limping Carmen, had a little baby boy. She hadn't been able to keep the man, the father had vanished without a trace, but Carmen had become a happy mother. And now Estrella longed for a little one, too. Maybe we should go see a doctor? Estrella gently asked her husband one evening after they had been intimate. Because we've been together for so many years, Rodrigo, and still we haven't managed to have a baby. Why are you always going on about babies? Rodrigo shrugged so sharply that Estrella's head fell off his shoulder like a popped balloon. Is happiness really in children? Children are stinky diapers, disgusting porridge, constant screaming. Do you really think we'd be able to live as freely and happily as we do now if you pressured me into some little larva? It was wild to Estrella that her husband referred to children as larvae, but she understood that this sort of thinking was, let's say, trendy now. For a while, the young woman dropped the subject, and only a couple of years later did she cautiously try to bring it up again. By then, she had firmly learned that Rodrigo had not had any children in his 2 previous marriages, and she reasonably suspected that the issue lay with him. After all, it couldn't be that all 3 of his wives were infertile. Listen, if I hear you mention kids again, I can't be held responsible for what I'll do, Rodrigo said rather harshly. All right, sweetheart, don't pout and cry. Just remember, if we ever need children, then we'll have them. But not now. Don't you want to live fully and enjoy every day? Where did we just come back from yesterday? A vacation, right? Would we have been able to fly to the sea on a whim, just like that, if we had children? Estrella was sure that plenty of modern couples manage to balance parenting and full lives, but knowing Rodrigo's character, she chose not to argue. Instead, the young woman simply agreed, kissed him, and was quietly pleased. It seemed her husband did love her after all. At the very least, he didn't hurt her, and he didn't really deprive her financially either. Just yesterday, he'd given her a bottle of fine French perfume as a welcome home gift. Could a girl who grew up in poverty ever have dreamed of such things? But the idyll didn't last long. Not long after that important conversation, Estrella had to face the fact that her husband was far from the soft and kind man she had imagined him to be. It started when her older sister, Violetta, reached out for help. "I don't even know what to do or where to go," Violetta said through the phone, clearly crying. "I have nowhere else to turn. The kids are with me, and my husband's throwing us out. Maybe you could help? Just let me stay somewhere for a month? I'll ask Rodrigo what we can do," Estrella promised. She was a kind and conscientious person, after all. "Are you out of your mind?" Rodrigo snapped when Estrella asked if they could shelter her sister and nieces or nephews for a little while. "As if having you hanging on my neck isn't enough, you want to drag your sister in too? If you've forgotten, my dear, this is my apartment, and you have no legal claim to it whatsoever. So no. No, and no again. And I don't want to hear another word about it. What are you trying to do, play Mother Teresa?" After thinking it over, Estrella had to admit to herself that she really couldn't help Violetta. She had no money of her own, no home of her own, nothing to offer her sister a chance to crash anywhere for a while. She had to say no. "You're heartless and cruel. You're doing all this on purpose, just to feel superior to me." Violetta sobbed into the phone. "You'll see, when Rodrigo kicks you to the curb, I won't lift a finger to help you." "And he will," she added bitterly. "Violetta, what do you expect me to do? I have nothing." Estrella couldn't understand her sister's sudden hostility. "I don't know, convince him, beg him. Surely you know some womanly tricks to get what you want from your man." But Estrella knew one thing for sure: if Rodrigo didn't want to help her family, no one would be able to change his mind. He was a stubborn and determined man, and getting him to do something he didn't want to do was nearly impossible. Violetta, however, believed this was all just Estrella's way of making her suffer more, like it was some personal power trip. It was sad, but from that day on, her only living relative turned away from her forever. In Violetta's mind, Estrella had become the kind of uppity housewife who sits at home, occasionally runs out to the salon to have her nails done and her appearance refreshed, then returns home to wait for her husband like a loyal little lapdog. Violetta herself hadn't been so lucky in life. Her husband was just an ordinary factory worker, and on top of that, an unbelievable miser. She barely scraped by from paycheck to paycheck. And now, after that very same working man had thrown her and the kids out of their home, she was left surviving on bread and water with 2 children. But Estrella wasn't to blame for any of it. That day, Rodrigo's business friends had convinced him to unwind at a hotel with a sauna, and to bring their wives along too. And so it happened that Estrella accidentally overheard a conversation between her husband and his friends. It was true, her relationship with Rodrigo wasn't particularly warm or affectionate. It was far from sugar-sweet. But still, Estrella had always seen it as stable, and most importantly, as something with a future. Rodrigo, it turned out, had considered her nothing more than dead weight all along. As if he'd heard his wife's thoughts, the man repeated, "You could say I did Estrella a favor and pulled her out of the gutter. If it weren't for me, she'd have gone down the same road as her sister, passed around from hand to hand. Can you believe she actually wanted to bring some other woman with her litter into my apartment and dump them on me? How does something like that even enter her head?" "Women are getting too bold," the men around him agreed with a low rumble. Estrella decided not to wait around to hear what other sweet words her husband had in store. She simply stepped into the room and joined the cheerful group. Unsurprisingly, the conversation immediately changed. Later that evening, as they got ready for bed, Estrella accepted Rodrigo's tender goodnight kiss as a given and asked quietly, "Sweetheart, do you love me? I mean, really deeply? What, does it seem like I don't love you enough?" Rodrigo glanced at her. "I mean, if we're together, then obviously I love you." It wasn't the answer Estrella had hoped for, but it was the most she was ever likely to get. "I love you very much," the young woman said sincerely, snuggling up to Rodrigo. "I'm so happy we're together." "Of course you are," the man muttered. "I mean, I am a ray of sunshine in your otherwise pitch-dark life." Estrella chose not to respond. There was nothing to say. Just a quiet ache somewhere deep inside. She had hoped her husband saw her as an equal partner, but he clearly saw her as a burden. From that day forward, Estrella made a firm decision: no more coasting through life. It was time to do something, anything, to get back on her feet, so she wouldn't end up like Violetta, left with nothing but broken dreams. She didn't even want to think about the possibility that one day she and Rodrigo might part ways. But life is unpredictable. When Violetta was giving birth to one child after another, she hadn't imagined that her husband would eventually kick her out either. One day, Estrella seized a lucky moment. Rodrigo had just closed another deal and was in an especially good mood. She gently asked him for a favor. "Sweetheart, instead of getting me a birthday present, could you pay for some courses? Any kind, it doesn't matter. I'm just so tired of sitting at home. I want to contribute to our family budget. Let's figure out together what I could do. What would you like me to learn? What do I need?" Rodrigo looked at Estrella with surprise but didn't say anything. A few days later, for her birthday, the young woman received a gift, clearly pre-planned, a set of earrings and a pendant. But in addition, after thinking it over, Rodrigo agreed to her request. "All right, if you want to take courses, then take your courses. Remind me, didn't you once get your driver's license?" "I did," Estrella said proudly, touched that Rodrigo remembered. "When I was in vocational school, they offered it to everyone. I didn't regret spending the extra year to get it. We had great instructors at our school. So, I've been thinking, you'll go ahead and get licensed for the next category. You'll become one of the first female long-haul truck drivers," Rodrigo announced. Estrella looked at him in surprise. Of all the things she expected from her own husband, this was definitely not one of them. "What are you staring at me like that for?" her husband started teasing openly. "You said yourself I could choose how you could be useful to the family. So I thought, if I'm hiring drivers to haul cargo, why not let you join in if you're so eager to contribute? It'll work out just fine." Estrella had been hoping for something in the beauty field. With her background in hairdressing, something like lash extensions, brows, or even manicure courses would have been perfect. Then she could ask her loving husband to buy her some equipment, and voila, her career would be underway. Clearly, Rodrigo was joking. "Rodrigo, you can't be serious, right?" she asked, just in case. "It's just that, well, I'm a little scared to get behind the wheel again after so many years." "That's nothing to worry about," Rodrigo replied cheerfully. "And please stop turning up your nose at my gifts. I told you what you'll be doing, so start preparing. Or I'll think you lied about wanting to help and take part in our family business." Like it or not, Estrella had to plaster on a smile and, a few days later, report to her driving instructor. He was a stern man with a scar running from his left temple to the corner of his mouth. At first, he trained her on a regular car at a driving course. Then they drove out of town together, and eventually, it was time for city driving. At first, Estrella was terrified. But then she got used to it, and even started feeling euphoric. After all, there had been a time when she really wanted to drive and had even dreamed that Rodrigo would buy her a car one day. She'd once seen a movie where a loving husband gifted his wife a car after the birth of their son, and she secretly hoped it would be the same for them. Unfortunately, she got neither a son nor a car, but now, at least, she felt confident behind the wheel. "All right, your basic skills are solid now," the instructor told her after a couple of months. "Time to start training with a heavy-duty truck." To say it was hard for Estrella would be an understatement. Not only did she have to study diligently to avoid embarrassing herself in front of her instructor, but Rodrigo also gave her no slack whatsoever. Even though most of her day was now taken up by training, she was still expected to greet him in the evening with a warm smile and a delicious dinner, no matter how exhausted she was. "What, you thought money falls from the sky?" Rodrigo would say when she so much as hinted at being tired. "I work too, you know, almost no days off. So let's pull this weight together." At some point, Estrella began to feel confident and free behind the wheel of a big rig. Of course, it didn't happen overnight, but gradually she learned to enjoy driving large vehicles. She started noticing curious glances along the highways, drivers honking when they realized a woman was behind the wheel. By then, even her usually reserved, no-nonsense instructor had started chatting more. "Never would have guessed that the wife of such a wealthy man would have such specific hobbies and interests," he remarked. Estrella just shrugged. She'd already realized that Rodrigo hadn't told anyone it had been his idea to put her behind the wheel of a freight truck. So, no one needed to know. "Driving a rig can be a gold mine," said the instructor, whose name was Raul, "but only if you have a good co-driver, someone you can really trust. There are a lot of pitfalls in this profession, and an unreliable partner is one of the worst." Estrella listened closely, nodded, and mentally took notes. Now she was truly curious, what would Rodrigo come up with for his wife once she finally got her commercial license? "Congratulate me, sweetheart, we have something to celebrate," Estrella said one day, proudly laying her new license on the table in front of Rodrigo. She waited, expecting loud congratulations. Because, no matter how you looked at it, she had just accomplished something huge. "Congratulations," Rodrigo replied dryly, without even lifting his eyes from the computer. "By the way, I have some good news for you." "And what news is that?" Estrella sat down across from him and fixed her eyes on her husband. Truthfully, she was still hoping for a four-wheeled gift to celebrate getting her new license category. "You'll have a brilliant opportunity to put your new skills to use tonight," Rodrigo said with a slight smile, finally raising his eyes from the screen and looking at his wife. "And no need to thank me. Could it be? Maybe my loving husband is better than I thought and actually bought me a car." The thought flashed through Estrella's mind like lightning, and a hopeful smile lit up her face. "Don't get too excited," Rodrigo said in an icy tone. "It just means you have 30 minutes to pack your things and get out of my apartment. And to get you to your new place, I'll be generous enough to allocate a car, which a driver will then return." I don't understand. What are you saying?" Estrella stared at him in confusion, even shaking her head slightly. Maybe she was hallucinating from weeks of exhaustion? "I told you, I'm sick of you. I don't want to see you anymore." "So you're leaving," Rodrigo said, still with that gentle smile that sharply contrasted with his ice-cold words. "Don't make me repeat myself." As it turned out, Rodrigo had a very peculiar sense of humor. As compensation for the nearly 15 years they had spent together, he gave his wife a little shack on the outskirts of the city, a pitiful house barely worthy of being called a dwelling. True, the documents didn't show that. The property certificate listed it as a 4-room house. "That's so you don't go around whining that I treated you unfairly," Rodrigo said over his shoulder while Estrella was packing her things. "I don't need my good name being dragged through the mud by friends, relatives, or acquaintances." At that moment, Estrella hadn't yet seen the state of the house. Had she known, she certainly would have had something to say back to him. During their marriage, Rodrigo had bought a lot of real estate, just as financial investments, just in case. Estrella was now certain that everything had been cleverly registered either to his parents or his older sister, but never to him directly, so she'd have no legal claim. Clever, no doubt about it. Rodrigo kept a close watch to make sure Estrella didn't take anything he considered his from the apartment. Even when he saw her placing perfume and makeup into a bag, he merely gave a theatrical, scornful snort. To Estrella, though, those things were her whole life. You came to me with one little bag of underwear and socks, and look how I've dressed you up now. Rodrigo gestured toward the half-dozen bags piled in the hallway. If we add it all up, you probably owe me in the end. Estrella didn't even turn her head at that jab. Clearly, Rodrigo had planned this all in advance. He was just waiting for the right time to throw her out. And he wanted to make it hurt, deeply and humiliatingly. When Estrella finally arrived at the place where she was now supposed to live, following her GPS, she practically clutched her chest in shock. Yes, she'd never lived in luxury growing up. And it had taken her years to get used to even the basic comforts of their marital home after student dorm life. But what she saw now was simply appalling. She stared in horror at the dilapidated roof, where the wind whistled freely, the broken windows, the swollen, damp door barely hanging on its frame. She just wanted to cry. She couldn't imagine how a lone, vulnerable woman could possibly make this place livable in a short amount of time. Silence reigned all around, and as Estrella stepped out onto the porch, she looked around anxiously. Not only was the shack nearly collapsing, it was also in complete isolation. No neighbors in sight. It wasn't hard to guess, Rodrigo could have easily found her a more decent place. But he'd done this deliberately, as payback to a wife he now loathed. What did I do to deserve this? Estrella whispered, leaning her temple against the damp, cold doorframe. Why is this happening to me? What did I ever do to Rodrigo for him to treat me this way? Well, cry all you want, but tears won't help, Estrella muttered to herself. She looked wistfully in the direction where the driver had taken the car that brought her here, then cast her eyes over the pile of bags she had hauled to the gate with her own hands. One thing was clear, she had to do something. In just a few hours, it would get dark, and she definitely didn't want to spend her first night in this place amid total ruin. Her first stroke of luck was discovering that the previous owners had left quite a lot in the shed. Back when Estrella lived with her mother and older sister in a single room of a worker's dormitory, she had learned many things from the men who lived in the neighboring rooms. Of course, she wasn't anywhere near a professional electrician or handyman, but she had a basic understanding of how to use tools. Those skills had come in handy back then, because the dorm at her vocational school had also been in a truly awful state. A few hammer taps here, a screwdriver there, Estrella had managed just fine. Within a few hours, one of the rooms in the shack actually began to resemble something livable. She chose the one with a relatively intact ceiling and roof, and told herself that maybe her life wasn't as hopeless as it seemed. The door, although difficult to close, latched with a bolt. The windows, she boarded up with thick plastic she found in the shed, securing it with makeshift frames and tacks. For one night, Estrella decided that would do. The next morning, after grasping the full scale of her new reality, Estrella got to work, energetically and without compromise. Since Rodrigo hadn't bothered to leave her a single coin to live on, her assets amounted to just a few crumpled bills left in her wallet from her old life of comfort. She knew she couldn't count on financial stability until she found a job. So, she had to scope out the area. Although Rodrigo hadn't dumped her in the middle of nowhere, the neighborhood didn't exactly radiate stability or opportunity. The local sawmill, the main source of employment in the area, was on its last legs. Even the men were at risk of losing their jobs and having to leave for the capital. "There's definitely no work for women here," said the shopkeeper at a nearby store when Estrella struck up a conversation. "You said you're a hairdresser? Well, maybe you'll find some part-time work around the holidays or something, but on a regular basis. We don't even have a salon here. Anyone who really cares about their looks just drives into the city for a trim, and those who don't, it's because they don't care." Estrella wandered through the neighborhood and noticed how many people were openly staring at her. Word had clearly spread fast through the 2 local shops and the few diners that someone new had moved into the rundown shack on the edge of town. They were all watching her, studying her. No money. No connections. No job. No proper housing. No future in sight. Estrella had never imagined she could end up in such a miserable situation. Hoping for a shred of understanding or comfort from the one person she had left, she called her sister as soon as she returned from her fruitless search. But Violetta just laughed at her. "Well, look at that," she said. "Isn't that nice? Once upon a time, you left me out in the cold and weren't in a hurry to help. And now? I'm actually enjoying your little disaster. Don't bother calling me again. I've got no time to chat." Estrella understood well enough. Her sister had no time to talk, but plenty of time to gloat. But so what? Hadn't she already lost enough in a matter of days to stop worrying about someone who, as it turned out, couldn't care less about her? So, she moved on to a full-on deep clean of the house. With all her strength, Estrella tried to make her miserable shack as clean and livable as possible. Everything she could do, she did, with one pair of female hands, before sunset. She didn't eat once that day, only brewed herself a couple of cups of tea. Only when she finally straightened her aching back did Estrella realize how incredibly hungry she was, and that she barely had any food left. The last problem, Estrella solved with surprising ease and elegance, by summoning both courage and boldness to take a walk to the nearest house with lit windows, about 10 minutes away on foot. An elderly couple lived there, and when Estrella managed to explain, as clearly as possible, who she was, what she was doing in the area, and that she was in need of food, she quickly found out what true neighborly kindness meant. "Well, we don't keep a feast spread around here," the plump and cheerful old lady exclaimed, throwing up her hands, "but why not scoop a bucket of potatoes, half a bucket of onions, and something else? We must have a few things in the cellar. Grandpa, go on down there and let's see how we can treat our guest." That's how Estrella ended up the proud owner of an entire treasure trove. The old woman had clearly downplayed it when she said she could offer just a bucket and a half of veggies. Soon, there were 2 heads of cabbage on the table, a hefty bag of carrots, potatoes mixed with beets, golden waxy onions, and, under the cautious shouting of his wife, Grandpa Orlando also pulled up several large jars of homemade preserves from beneath the floorboards. Estrella felt tears welling in her eyes. Imagine that, her own sister had refused to help, the man she'd lived beside for nearly 15 years had thrown her out, and here were complete strangers, meeting her for the first time in their lives, sharing food without a second thought. "But how are you going to drag all this back, dear girl?" the old lady asked, folding her plump hands across her round belly in thought. "It's not far, I know, but still, you'd need at least a little cart. And even then, it's a lot to haul." "Grandpa, what's up with the car? Is it completely out of commission?" "The car's got wheels, but I'm not getting behind the wheel anymore, you know that," the old man replied, brushing off the knees of his sweatpants as he emerged from the cellar. "Eyes can barely see at this point, and feeling your way behind the wheel doesn't work, does it, dear heart?" "I have a license." Estrella piped up immediately. "If you'll let me, I can load everything myself under your supervision, and we'll drive over to my place together. Quick trip there and back, I'll return you safely, you can count on it." The elderly couple exchanged glances. It was clear that sharing food with a neighbor was no big deal here, but letting someone drive their car, especially someone they'd just met, that was something else. It was obvious that Grandpa Orlando wanted to say no and be done with it. But the old woman shook her head slowly a couple of times, sighed, and the old man, watching her, obediently reached into a tin box for the car keys. "Do you even know how to drive, or are you like all those youngsters who just buy licenses with daddy's money?" he grumbled. "I'll have you know," Estrella couldn't help herself, "I don't just have a regular car license, I'm also licensed to drive a heavy truck." "No kidding." Grandpa Orlando said, either genuinely surprised or simply amused by Estrella's response. He smiled into his long, white mustache. "Well, my truck's not that big, but you'll still need to drive it properly. These old Soviet cars aren't like your new ones. My grandson came once from the city with his fancy new car, and it had this, what do you call it, power steering. Electric assist, hydraulic assist." Estrella demonstrated her knowledge as they loaded vegetables into the old car's trunk. "That's it, hydraulic." Grandpa Orlando nodded so vigorously Estrella briefly worried for his safety. And those new systems too, the ones that keep the car from flying off the road. I mean, kids today are really lucky. Estrella had never driven a car this old before. Even at her vocational school, the vehicles were much newer. But experience is everything. The young woman confidently got behind the wheel, the engine roared to life, the old lady opened the gates, waddling from foot to foot, and Estrella drove out of the yard. They reached her new home in a matter of minutes. In fact, Estrella barely had time to enjoy the drive, it was over too quickly. And she loved driving. But for now, that wasn't the point. She quickly unloaded the trunk's contents onto the table on the open veranda and rushed to get Grandpa Orlando back home. After all, night had already fallen thick and dark. "Thank you so much," Estrella began saying on the way back with her kind benefactor. "I honestly don't know what I would have done without you." "I've never seen a woman handle a car so skillfully," the elderly man replied in an admiring tone. "I mean, sure, I get it with those modern fancy cars, but not with my old iron beast. Anyway, congratulations." After a courteous goodbye to her new neighbor and best wishes to the elderly couple, Estrella made her way back to her little house on foot. Her first full day in this new place had gone fairly well. Now, if only she could sort out the job situation, because the food wouldn't last forever, and hunger never sleeps. And besides, the shack would definitely need serious repairs before autumn set in. The very next morning, Estrella began knocking on every possible door in search of work. But since she didn't have much experience to boast about, people politely turned her away and hinted that they already had plenty of their own connections and no job openings. And if there were no openings, there was simply nowhere to hire her. "Try the farm. It's 50 kilometers that way," one man said after yet another rejection when Estrella asked about a job in a local hardware store. "I've heard they take just about anyone. So close, yet so out of reach." Not only did Estrella have no background in farm work, but getting there was a whole other issue. If she had been weaker in spirit, she would have likely given up and trudged back to her shack, the place Rodrigo had so graciously assigned her as a home. But Estrella only glanced toward the battered building, then turned sharply to the right, and headed straight back to the couple who had so kindly helped her with food the day before. "I'd like to rent your car," she said to Grandpa Orlando. "How much would you ask?" "I don't have much to offer, but I'll try my best." Estrella had made up her mind, if she could just gain mobility, she'd go to a pawn shop in the city and leave the jewelry Rodrigo had once given her. Not that it was a fortune, but it was something. Enough to buy food, at least, not beg for it. And who knows what Orlando would have answered, if not for the sound of a car horn blaring at the gate right at the moment he opened his mouth. "Our grandson's here," Grandma Rosa announced, wobbling toward the porch. And instead of continuing the conversation with Estrella, the neighbor turned and followed her. Estrella snapped her fingers in frustration. She had just come up with such a solid plan. If what the locals said about the farm was true, that they hired everyone, then being mobile could make her not just employable, but in demand. Why couldn't she work as a driver there instead of a milkmaid? Surely they had vehicles and needed people to drive them. And now this unexpected arrival of the mysterious grandson had thrown everything off. "Why does this always happen to me?" she thought bitterly. "Come on in, Felipe," the old woman chirped, already bustling at the doorway, letting a broad-shouldered young man through. "First you'll have a nice wash from the road, then we'll sit down for a meal. I'll get everything ready while you rest." At this little celebration of life, Estrella felt like a stranger. Her eyes stung with tears almost instantly. She had never once felt so wanted or important to anyone. She never knew her grandparents, and her mother had never exactly tried to be a solid support for her daughters. Both Estrella and Violetta had grown up in an environment deprived of love, warmth, and affection, and now it was clear what that upbringing had led to. The girl understood, no one was going to solve her problems for her. Now that this important guest, their beloved grandson, apparently, was on the doorstep, she would just have to wait. Oh well. What could she do? Thanks to yesterday's visit to the elderly couple, she at least had enough food to get by for a little while. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way out. If worse came to worst, she'd get on a bus, go into the city, and pawn the jewelry. Estrella was so deep in thought that she didn't notice how the young man who had just entered the house was staring at her, openly and quite coldly. His gaze was unfriendly, to say the least. He looked at Estrella like she was something foreign, something unwelcome. "This is our new neighbor, Estrella," the grandmother hurried to explain, having caught her grandson's look. "She just stopped by to visit." And before Estrella could say a word, introduce herself, or explain anything at all, the old woman went on. "She wanted to borrow the car, to maybe get herself to the farm and find a job." Felipe's face immediately darkened, and Estrella understood perfectly what he now thought of her. "So, she wanted to borrow the car," he repeated slowly and stared straight into her eyes. "I keep telling you people, nowadays, scammers are everywhere. But do you ever listen? Of course not. Come on now, don't say that." The grandmother bustled between the table, where she was laying out all sorts of delicious food, and the fridge in the corner. "Don't go accusing people of things. It just happened, that's all." Felipe, however, didn't change his mind. He squared his shoulders, tilted his head, and addressed Estrella directly. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself, trying to pull a stunt like that? I mean, any normal person would be embarrassed to take advantage of old people. But you're not one of the normal ones, are you?" His grandmother nudged him in the side, but playfully, without malice. "Don't judge, Felipe. Life happens. We remember the hard times in the 90s, lots of people came for help back then, and they received it from their neighbors." "Exactly, Grandma. From neighbors, not from total strangers who just showed up out of nowhere," Felipe shot back. "She says her husband dumped her, bought her a shack on the edge of town, and left her to fend for herself, no money, nothing. We help because we're human too, Felipe," the grandmother said simply, repeating what Estrella had told her yesterday. "And the husband's not human? Maybe he just finally realized who he had let into his home and sent her packing. And you, like fools, took her in." He turned to Estrella. "All right, miss, I think it's time you left. Or I'll go to the police and file a report." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Estrella's voice faltered. She felt humiliated in front of this tall, handsome man. Under different circumstances, she might have even admired his build or charm. They were about the same age, which only made the sting sharper. "And trying to take an old couple's car, that's fine by you?" Felipe pressed, continuing to back her toward the door. "Last I checked, taking someone's property wasn't considered normal. So come on now, out you go." Grandpa Orlando wasn't home at that moment, probably busy heating the bathhouse for his grandson's arrival. Grandma chose not to interfere anymore. And Estrella realized with painful clarity she would have done the same in her place. Who was Estrella to her, after all? Just a girl who'd appeared yesterday and immediately asked for help. Now even the kind woman was looking at her with suspicion, probably starting to wonder if her grandson had a point. With a heavy sigh and head bowed, Estrella opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Well, a negative experience is still experience. She had no choice now but to head toward the bus stop and hope she'd have better luck there. The locals said transportation here was more or less reliable, but for Estrella, every penny spent on a ticket, without a clear prospect of earning anything, felt like a knife to the heart. Today, clearly, was not Estrella's day. One bus whooshed right past her, sparkling clean windows gleaming in the sun, and didn't stop. The second bus arrived so packed that even some of the locals refused to get on. "It's coming from the villages, that's why it's like this," a chatty middle-aged man explained to her. "You need to wait for the next one, the local one. That one should be empty." "And how long is the wait?" Estrella asked cautiously. "Well, according to the schedule, 20 minutes. But after that, who knows? You get how it works here, these are private carriers. They can skip the route just because they feel like it." The prospects were anything but bright. Estrella looked around, found a makeshift bench beneath a sprawling poplar tree, and sat down to ponder her difficult fate. By all accounts, Rodrigo had completely trampled her with his actions, and she had no way to fight back. Taking him to court over the wealth and property accumulated over their 15 years of marriage was a dead end. A man who had already divorced twice, who had significant financial means, wasn't likely to let her take even a bite out of what he owned. And besides, Estrella had no money for lawyers, not a single coin. Getting back on her feet would be incredibly hard. She could, of course, shut up the shack, return to the city, find a job, and rent a tiny room. But how long could she survive like that? Estrella understood that this was a road to nowhere, a dead end. And that rather than hand money over to some stranger for rent, it would be better to invest it in fixing up the shack. She was so deep in thought, she didn't notice a man come up and stand beside her. Her eyes were fixed on the spit-stained pavement, littered with cigarette butts and scraps of paper. She only came out of her heavy thoughts when the man next to her spoke directly to her. "I still want to figure out what kind of person you are," he said. "I was just thinking, I'm about to leave this area, and you're going to be right here, under their noses. That's not going to end well. Next time I come back, maybe it won't be the car you're after, maybe it'll be the house." Estrella looked up in horror and confusion at Felipe, who loomed over her like a mountain. What stung most was knowing that many people here clearly respected him, and they were listening closely to every word he said. Even the usual chatter and arguments at the bus stop had gone quiet. Everyone was listening to Felipe. And they were now looking at Estrella with nothing but suspicion. "You've misunderstood everything," Estrella said, waving her hand slightly. "I never wanted to do anything illegal." "Yeah, that's what they all say, even when they're already on trial. But I don't care, got it? Just make sure you stay away from my grandparents. If I ever find out you're around them again, I don't know what I'll do." Felipe leaned in close, too close, and Estrella felt a wave of fear and hurt wash over her. She truly had no hidden intentions, no ill will. "All right," she said, shaking her head. "Let's just pretend I never met them. I won't come near them again. Does that work for you? Is that enough?" "I'll be keeping a very close eye on how my grandparents are doing," Felipe continued, ignoring her question. "I've got a lot of friends in this area, and they'll be sure to report anything that happens." "Well, I'm glad they'll report everything to you," Estrella shot back. "So maybe you can go talk to your friends now and leave me alone?" This conversation was causing Estrella unbearable pain. As if she hadn't suffered enough in the past few days, now this arrogant young man was piling on. Just then, a bus pulled up with a screech, and Estrella, not listening to another word from Felipe, rushed toward it. Thank God she had a chance to just get away. She returned from the city exhausted, barely dragging her feet. She hadn't even allowed herself a bun from the store, saving every penny, waiting until she was back in the district so she could eat properly. And on top of it all, the pawnshop gave her far too little money. They openly told her they believed the jewelry was stolen. Estrella knew this was just a tactic to give her less and profit more, and she simply waved it off. In the end, what did it matter? She had no other way of getting money, so she'd just have to make do with what she had. Her biggest concern now was not missing the last bus back to her district. She couldn't afford to sleep on the road. Luckily, she had somewhere to return to. Estrella brewed herself some tea, adding a generous spoonful of sugar from the groceries she'd bought in the city. She stepped out onto the porch with the cup in hand and watched the stars begin to light up in the sky above the district. On a full stomach, life didn't seem nearly as hostile. Maybe, with time, she'd even figure something out work-wise. According to Estrella's estimates, the money she managed to scrape together today might be just enough to cover some basic carpentry work. It would be nice if the door to her little house could actually close properly. And the windows desperately needed new panes. The plastic sheet stapled to the frames looked absolutely awful. Estrella longed to make her miserable little shack into something more dignified, not a palace, of course, but at least a space that felt safe and livable. She didn't even notice how long she'd been gazing toward the part of the district where Grandpa Orlando's house stood, the same house she'd been so unpleasantly turned away from earlier that day. She had a strong feeling that Felipe wouldn't rest until he ruined her reputation with everyone in the area. There really were people like him, bitter, unpleasant, the kind who found joy in making others feel small. Then again, Estrella reflected with a sad smile, there were other kinds too, like Rodrigo. The kind you never see coming. They seem gentle, even generous. But behind the soft smiles and warm gestures is a wolf in sheep's clothing. The kind who has a master plan already in place, a plan that no longer includes you. So really, who was worse? Felipe, who at least was honest about his hostility. Or Rodrigo, who destroyed everything quietly, behind your back. Estrella had always been a night owl. And tonight, she stayed up almost until 1 a.m., wrapped in an old blanket she'd found in the shack. From time to time, she glanced toward the neighbor's house, sighed heavily, and accepted that she'd never be welcome there again. Just as she was about to finally head to bed, something caught her eye. Something had changed in the direction of the neighbor's house. It was hard to see in the dark, but something didn't look right. She narrowed her eyes, focused, and froze. There was a flicker of light. Then more. Something was burning, either the house or something in the yard. Estrella didn't stop to think. She didn't recall the humiliation she'd experienced there earlier, or Felipe's threats, or the silence of the elderly couple when she was thrown out. All that mattered now was getting there in time, and making sure the old folks were okay. As it turned out, she arrived just in time. Faulty wiring had been sparking in one of the rooms. And instead of calling an electrician to fix it properly, Grandpa Orlando had been putting it off. That evening, needing something from the room, he'd simply lit a thick utility candle and gone in. And then he'd forgotten about it. He got distracted, wandered off to finish his chores, and eventually went to bed with his wife. The candle burned down, and the flame reached a pile of newspapers stacked nearby. That was all it took for the fire to start. If Estrella hadn't seen the glow and rushed over, there might not have been anything left of the house, or the people inside. At first, she tried to wake the dazed elderly couple by herself. The doors were locked tight, but Estrella figured out that one of the windows was open, and climbed through. Grandpa Orlando was too groggy to understand what was happening, but his wife was quicker on her feet. Together, the two women helped get him out into the fresh air. With one hand, Estrella dialed the fire department on her cell phone. With the other, she beat at the flames with a heavy blanket. Soon, Grandpa Orlando returned with 2 buckets of water and dumped them on the fire. The 3 of them fought the flames together. No one else from the neighborhood came to help. Whether they didn't see or simply didn't want to get involved, Estrella never found out. In the end, one room was badly damaged, but the fire didn't spread. When the fire brigade arrived, all they had to do was soak the wooden structure and confirm the flames were out. By morning, it was all anyone could talk about, how Grandma Rosa and Grandpa Orlando had nearly burned alive during the night. Estrella overheard the conversations when she ran to the grocery store. And truthfully, it made her a little sad. No one seemed to mention her role in saving the couple. Not a word. Yesterday, when Felipe had launched his self-righteous tirade at the bus stop, everyone had stared at her sideways. No one even bothered to say a simple thank you. All right, the elderly couple, sure, they were probably still in shock. But what was stopping the other residents from expressing some basic gratitude? After gathering a bag of the simplest groceries, and unable to resist picking up a small handful of caramels, she'd always had a sweet tooth, Estrella grabbed her purchases and headed home. She had big plans for the day. She needed to go through the contents of the shed, see what tools were available, and then slowly start looking for local handymen, jacks of all trades. By the time the cold set in, that shack had to be more than just shelter, it had to be livable. While she still had some of the money left from pawning her jewelry, she needed to use it wisely. But as her little house came into view in the distance, Estrella groaned. This was exactly what she didn't need right now. There was a car parked by the house. And she already knew who had come to see her. No doubt, Felipe had returned, ready to settle the score. She wondered, would he accuse her of setting the grandparents' house on fire right away, or wait a few minutes into the conversation? And what would he demand this time? That she pack her bags and leave the neighborhood? Sure, she'd do it gladly, if only she had anywhere else to go. Yes, I know. I disobeyed your orders and dared to go near your precious grandparents, Estrella said, brushing past Felipe at the gate, silently marveling at how accurately she guessed his identity. What would you have preferred, that they burned to death? No? Well then, let's not pretend this is a courtroom. Now if you'll excuse me. Not waiting for a response, Estrella trudged toward the door. She had no energy to listen to what this man thought of her. She had enough problems of her own. A polite cough behind her made Estrella jump. She'd been so focused on wrestling with the sticky lock that she hadn't even noticed what was going on around her. I actually came to apologize, Felipe said in his deep voice, reaching out and, with a single motion, turning the stubborn key. The lock clicked open, letting Estrella into her shack. I think I was unfair to you yesterday. I'm sorry. Well. Is that iron rods falling from the sky? Estrella muttered to herself. So Felipe was capable of some basic human reasoning after all. He didn't wait for an invitation. Ignoring the silence, he confidently stepped into her shack, looked around, let out a not-so-polite exclamation, and clicked his tongue several times. Wow. And how are you even living in this? I mean, seriously, it looks uninhabitable. Dangerous, even. If you've said everything you wanted to say, then please turn around and leave, Estrella replied sharply. She had no reason to be polite. I don't need Captain Obvious pointing out the obvious. I live the way I can. Look, I get it, Felipe said. But I'd really like to make things right. Your name is Estrella, isn't it? No, I'm a con artist and a scammer. I don't get to have a real name, she snapped. If you're lost, the door is right behind you. I'm sorry again. But just try to see it from my point of view. I don't visit my grandparents often. And yesterday, I show up, and who do I see? A young, attractive woman. And those are the types who often are scammers, by the way. People fall for a pretty face. And my grandpa's telling me he's going to give his old car to you. Grandma too. Because you, get this, want to drive it to work. Sweetheart, that car wouldn't budge if you begged it. Oh, really? That was too much. Estrella narrowed her eyes. You sure about that, Felipe? You ready to stand by your words? His expression turned stubborn, and he nodded. All right then, Estrella said, eyeing him thoughtfully. If I not only get your grandfather's car to move, but prove I know what I'm doing behind the wheel, then you. She paused. Then you'll fix the damage you did to my reputation yesterday. Tell people in this wonderful neighborhood that I'm not the manipulative which you made me out to be. Deal? And what if I win? Felipe asked with a smirk. Keep in mind, I know that car inside and out. It was my first car, and now I'm a professional driver. I've taken it apart down to the tiniest screw. So tell me, what happens if I win? Then I don't know, Estrella shrugged. I've stated my terms. If you want, go ahead and name yours. All right, Felipe said suddenly, lifting his head. If I win, you go on a date with me. How about that? I'm waiting for your answer. Caught up in the heat of the moment, Estrella waved her hand dismissively. She had no doubt she'd win this challenge, and then Felipe would have to restore her reputation. After all, no one had forced him to publicly shame her at the bus stop. He brought that on himself. Felipe offered to drive her to his grandparents' house, but Estrella firmly declined. So they traveled separately. But why? Felipe asked, confused, pulling up beside her as she walked along the roadside. Did my offer really offend you that much? I'm not such a monster, you know. Trust, Estrella said, enunciating the word with a tone so serious it made even her smile. I don't trust you. I don't trust people who judge others at first glance. A glance that's wrong, unfair, and undeserved. She paused, then added, thinking of her old driving instructor. I wouldn't go on a long-haul trip with you in a truck. You never know what to expect from someone like you, or rather, you do know. Nothing good. Felipe didn't argue. He just drove along beside her the whole way, blatantly ignoring traffic rules. But who cared about that around here? Estrella was confident she would succeed, though she still felt a bit nervous. Especially when the engine sputtered and refused to start properly. Her palms began to sweat. Great, just what she needed. But after that first hiccup, everything went smoothly. Estrella not only got the old car roaring and out of the yard, but she also showed off just how comfortable she was behind the wheel, pulling off a few impressive maneuvers that bordered on showy. When she finally stepped out of the vehicle, she noticed the elderly couple, whom she'd saved the night before, looking at her with delight, glancing between her and Felipe, nudging each other in the ribs. As for Felipe, he was staring at her with his mouth slightly open. Estrella had been right in her assumptions. I just didn't expect that, Felipe admitted honestly. I mean, yeah, I know lots of women drive now, but that was something else. My compliments. Besides the compliments, Estrella said, carefully stressing every word, we had a deal. So now do your part. I don't care how you do it, but I want to hear a public retraction of what you said about me yesterday. Immediately. Felipe looked at her differently now, really differently. I'm truly sorry, he said. He kept his word. Some things he said plainly, others he padded with a little flair, but he told the locals that he now saw Estrella as a true heroine. You all know how long it takes for the fire department to get out here, Felipe said reasonably. If it weren't for Estrella and her courage, I might have lost my grandparents. They raised me. I owe them everything. And suddenly, as if after a summer rain, helpful offers began to spring up all around Estrella. Someone remembered a glazier friend who worked cheap. Someone else offered to connect her with a carpenter for cost price. Another realized he had some leftover roofing sheets in his garage, and if Estrella needed them, he could bring a few over to patch her roof. Needless to say, Estrella was overwhelmed with emotion. Honestly, she could barely hold back tears as she listened to all the offers of help. Even Felipe, it seemed, had completely changed his view of her. He got involved in everything happening at her home and in her yard, helping with repairs and logistics. And then, working up the courage, he invited the young woman on a real date. He did it so naturally and easily, as if they had been best friends all along. And Estrella, after thinking it over, realized, why not? She was alone anyway, with nothing in her past worth holding on to. And Felipe, if she really thought about it, wasn't a bad guy at all. At first, Felipe drove her to the city. And for the first time since leaving Rodrigo, Estrella spent an evening relaxed and full of laughter. Then these outings became more frequent. The young couple went to the movies and the theater, met Felipe's friends, and even took a weekend trip to the sea. Before long, they couldn't imagine being apart. Work also began to settle into place for Estrella. Once the locals were sure she wasn't a threat, she was offered a position as a dispatcher at the local bus station. The salary was laughably small, but in her situation, she couldn't afford to be picky. Felipe became more and more insistent in his affection. He even began insisting that Estrella shouldn't spend the winter in that shack and needed to think about moving to the city. No, thank you, my dear, the young woman laughed heartily when she first heard the suggestion. You know perfectly well how things ended for me last time I lived under someone else's roof. I'm not going through that again. But I want us to be a family, Felipe said, genuinely confused by her reluctance. After all this time with you, Estrella, I've realized there's no one better for me. I want you to be my wife. I want us to have children. How's that supposed to happen if you won't even move in with me? Estrella stood with her back to Felipe, silent and straight as a rod. Two conflicting feelings tore at her chest. On one hand, she wanted to throw her arms around him and say yes, that she wanted to be his other half and the mother of their future children. On the other hand, what if it turned out just like it had with Rodrigo? What if she ended up alone again? Remember you talked about trust? Felipe wrapped his arms around her from behind and started kissing her neck. Well, I trust you completely, Estrella. I want you to trust me too. Just like we trust each other before a long haul. This journey, our journey, is life. And I want to take that road together. Eventually, though not immediately, Estrella said yes. It became possible thanks to Felipe's persistence and his refusal to accept her refusals. Again and again, he told her he loved her, that he valued her, that he would never hurt or abandon her like her first husband had. Yet, strangely enough, what finally tipped the scale in Felipe's favor was Rodrigo. Their meeting was unexpected and emotional, even overwhelmingly so, from Estrella's perspective. That day, Estrella had been waiting for Felipe to arrive early. They had plans to spend the weekend together in the city. Before that, she wanted to visit Grandma Rosa and Grandpa Orlando to help out around the house. The elderly couple had been deteriorating quite quickly lately. Hearing a car pull up at the gate, Estrella ran out onto the porch with a warm smile. She had no doubt it was Felipe. Well, hello there, said Rodrigo, standing in front of her, twirling a set of luxury car keys around his thick finger. I was in the area, thought I'd drop by, see how you're doing. Snapping out of it, Estrella's warm smile faded into a cold, blank expression. She didn't want to see Rodrigo, remember him, or even think about him. You've seen me. Now turn around and leave, I've got no time to talk, plenty of my own things to worry about. She turned to head back inside when his voice stopped her. For your information, I came here to make peace, he said. You're really going to treat me like this? I've been thinking, maybe it wasn't right the way I threw you out like that, with no explanation. I sat down, started remembering things, you were a great woman. So yeah. Come back. The house feels empty without a woman in it. Instead of being offended, excited, or even remotely emotional, which would have been expected in such a moment, Estrella threw her head back and burst into unrestrained laughter. So you wandered around, realized your disgusting personality is of no use to anyone, figured out that in a few years you'll be 50, and any woman will only be with you for your money. And now that I've learned to live without you, you show up here? What for, Rodrigo? Hoping I'll wait for you to get bored again and throw me out once more, this time without even a shack to my name? No, thank you. I've had enough of being married to you. The man flushed deep red and took a step forward. You have no idea, you idiot, what you're saying. No normal woman turns down a chance to live in comfort instead of this. Or has your brain fried from all the misery? I'm telling you, pack your things, get in the car, and let's go. I know you're counting pennies here, living off scraps. Don't pretend like you pity me. You know what our relationship was missing? Estrella looked at Rodrigo with clarity, wondering how she'd ever loved him. It never had trust. I could never lean on you, while you leaned on me as if it were nothing. You never even cared whether I could be a support to you or not. This is the last time I'm telling you, get in the car. Rodrigo crossed his arms, clearly showing he wasn't open to discussion. You want guys to laugh at me? I don't need you ending up on the street, drinking yourself to death. Do I look like I'm drinking? Estrella laughed again, but this time softly, gently. And that shack? Look at it closely. Does it still look like the wreck your driver dumped me yet? Now I have a roof over my head, honestly earned money, and a man I love. My life has come together just fine, Rodrigo. So please, leave and don't come back. What? A man you love? Rodrigo sneered. Well, now you've outed yourself, Estrella. What kind of decent man would look twice at you? You're nothing special, and still you dare aim so high? But Estrella didn't even grace him with a response. She looked past Rodrigo's shoulder and then suddenly rushed toward Felipe, who was just walking through the gate. Rodrigo watched the scene unfold with a mix of disgust and disbelief. Never in his life had the successful businessman imagined that he would offer Estrella a way back, and she'd reject him. Who did she think she was, to treat him like that? And what kind of guy had she even found? Still, he didn't dare pick a fight with Felipe, whose strong, athletic build made Rodrigo feel instantly inferior. Muttering curses under his breath, he turned and left the property, slamming the gate behind him. Estrella, watching her protector closely, suddenly beamed. "Do you know how much I love you?" "I think I have a pretty good idea," Felipe said, wrapping her in a hug and showering her with kisses. "So, how about that walk?" A few months later, Felipe and Estrella finally made it to the registry office, at Felipe's insistence. After all, when there's a baby on the way, it's best to do everything properly. Grandpa Orlando and Grandma Rosa were thrilled about their future great-grandchild but absolutely refused to move to the city to live with their grandson and his wife. "You just make sure to visit often, and we'll manage here on our own," Grandma Rosa said. "When the baby's born, they'll need milk, butter, cream, cottage cheese. How are we supposed to leave all that behind?" "Don't count us out just yet," Grandpa Orlando added with a sly grin. "Not only will we spoil this great-grandchild, we'll stick around long enough to meet the next one too."